I'm Monica Patton. I am the very honored to be the chair of Compassionate Ottawa. And let me start with the acknowledgement that we're located on the uncharted and unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. We work here and we pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging. Today, we're going to continue our journey on building a compassionate community where everyone has a chance to live as well as they can for as long as they can. That's really at the heart of Compassionate Ottawa's work, because we believe that everybody has the right, if you will, to live with respect and with dignity and as well as possible. And everyone has a responsibility to be helpful in making that possible for others. So this morning, we have an opportunity to continue our work in that direction. But before I introduce Mary Lou Kelley, who is a Compassionate Ottawa volunteer who will be speaking with Julian Abel, I want to tell you that this session has been recorded. We had a little drama over the weekend, and I am very grateful that both Mary Lou and Julian were able to put it together as a recording. I do want to tell you also that Julian will be joining us live for the time of conversation and questions and answers. But what you're going to have at first will be a wonderful recording that Mary Lou and Julian did together on Sunday. So let me introduce Mary Lou, known to many of you. Mary Lou is, first and foremost, from my perspective, a very active and wonderful volunteer for Compassionate Ottawa, leading one of our major initiatives called Care for Life, which is a partnership with the Social Planning Council and the ethnocultural group of seniors who are associated with the Social Planning Council. A real compassion building initiative that is led by Mary Lou, who brings to us a long and rich background as an academic in social work with a particular interest in palliative care and the community in palliative care. So I'm going to welcome you, Mary Lou, and turn it over to you, and you're going to introduce the rest of it. Thanks so much for being with us, Mary Lou.
Well, thanks, Monica, and great to be here today. And I'm going to introduce I guess, our guest today, Julian Abel, in absentia. He will be joining us in about an hour, as Monica said. He had a very time-sensitive conflict to deal with. So Julian Abel was a palliative care physician in England for most of his professional career. And over the course of his career, it recognized that so much of the well-being of his clients, patients, depended on their support in the community. And he transitioned his attention to really trying to shine a light on the community and think of ways of supporting the community in helping people with serious illness, caregiving, dying, and grieving. So Julian now is busier than he's ever been in his life. He's the director of Compassionate Communities UK. He's a visiting professor of health and life sciences at Northumbria University, Newcastle. And he's a prolific author of articles and book chapters and a tremendous advocate in England and internationally for the importance of compassionate communities. So I think you're going to find this conversation interesting, stimulating, and in some ways a bit provocative, which we can revisit when we get into the conversation or the questions after the conversation. So I'll sign off now, and Paula can launch the conversation. Well, good morning, Julian, and thank you for joining us again in the Compassionate Ottawa Conversation with Leaders series. Great to have you back. And today we're going to talk about the power of community connection. I know that's something that you and I are both very passionate about. So can you begin by, I mean, we're both working in the area of compassionate communities. Can you begin by just talking about what a compassionate community is?
Well, so nice. Always nice to chat with you, Mary Lou. And thank you for inviting me. And I'm here with my dog. You can see there's a paw wandering around here. Um, and really nice to be invited back to have a conversation with the fantastic people you're working with. What's a compassionate community? Well, in a way, one of the ways of thinking about this is that we already live in compassionate communities. Whenever people come together in a friendly way, wherever that is, and it might be, in a workplace, outside the school gates, in our homes, in a healthcare setting, doesn't matter where it is. Whenever people come together in a friendly way, that's a compassionate community, because those are the moments where we look out for each other and look after each other. A compassionate community is not something we have to invent. It already exists. And we need to absolutely recognize it and recognize the importance of it. Because if we can do that, we just make use of, we see that communities have a really important role to play everywhere and anywhere. And if we're aware of that, then we transform our world, and we transform the world for the people around us. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and of course, that resonates with my experience of my community. And you'll know I recently moved from Thunder Bay, where I had lived most of my life, to Ottawa, and I had another opportunity of changing geographies and finding myself in living in a condo in a new city, and finding my own community here, and really experiencing the compassionate outreach of people, welcoming me into the community and helping me find where I would get groceries and where I would find a hairdresser, and that sort of thing. So, and I think we've all benefited in our times of need from our family, friends, and neighbors who have stepped up. So it sounds like we're just recognizing and nurturing something that we've all experienced and is there for us.
I think that's right. And the great thing about it is, because it's already familiar to us, we don't have to invent or reinvent or do something different. We just do more of what we're already doing. And it's just like, oh, well, this is
And the beauty of it is these are the people we know and trust, and they know us. And in many cases, we don't have to ask for help. People recognize when we're in some kind of distress and just reach out. And that, of course, seems to be ideal.
And I think the other thing, I guess one of the things that we tend to do is that we tend to kind of, because of our backgrounds, coming from a healthcare setting or social science or humanities, whatever it is, we tend to think that that a compassionate community is something to do with help, but actually, it's lying at the core of it is belonging. Because we feel nourished as a human being. Our kind of positive qualities come out when we have a sense of belonging, and that allows, in that state of belonging, we can be useful to our community, and we can even, be aware of how useful the community is to us. So it's not just in the moments when we're kind of in need. The community, in a way, has already got to be there. But if we have a sense of belonging, then a compassionate community can arise. It's quite tricky to do without at least some vestige of belonging being there.
Mhm. Yeah, and they're the same people that we have fun with.
Yep.
And they're the same people that we socialize with, and that kind of foundation of the social relationships in everyday life really is what allows the help in the times of distress.
And I think that's right. And it's also like that sense of belonging is nourished by you know, those moments down the shops when even if we meet someone new, or you know, there's a smile that passes between people, or somebody holds a door open, or just any of those kind of light social contact, which is, you know, helps to increase the environment in which we kind of walk through, that gives a sense of belonging. And so it goes from, you know, very deep friendships to these really light social contacts, which creates this whole environment of feeling like we're not alien to the world, which is a really kind of powerful thing.
Would it be fair to say that compassionate community in some ways is a culture and an attitude that we try and model and support, nurture?
I think so. I think that's a great way. That's a great way of thinking about it. It's not something special we have to invent. It's already there. We need to. I suppose one of the phrases that I really like, it's about bringing to light what is hidden and connecting it up.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and really acknowledging it, I think, is what you're saying. I guess the other comment that I'm thinking about is we live in compassionate communities, plural. I mean, I have a compassionate community around me here in my condo where I live now. I also have a compassionate community amongst the volunteers that I work with in Compassionate Ottawa. I have a compassionate community of longtime friends back in Thunder Bay, where I came from, and from many other places. And you know, I will never forget my husband, John, talking about he was a member of a recreational hockey team for 25 years. And those guys sat in the dressing room after the hockey games and solved the problems of the world, as many times people do when they get together. But they also provided so much support and help. One of the members of their hockey team had to have very serious surgery, you know, away from the city, and they called him from the dressing room. And when one of them was bereaved, they would gather around and support. So, and then there was a compassionate community in the workplace and then in the neighborhood. So, yeah, I think it's good to think of mini communities. You know, I'm not talking about Ottawa as a compassionate community, you know, more than 1 million people. That's not my compassionate community. Mine are smaller and more, yeah, connected to me personally.
I think that I think that's absolutely right. You know, so in a way, you know, wherever we kind of walk through in the world, that's our compassionate community. And as we'll go on to discuss with the whole kind of connector thing, that compassionate community can exist as an environment, and which we're really sensitive to. And so if you walk into a bar or a cafe or a restaurant or something like that, that because of the whole kind of business about body language and about all kinds of different ways that we pick up the atmosphere of a place, you can so living in a friendly town is very different from living in a town which is full of alienation and feeling unsafe. So it extends not just to the people we know, but the whole feeling of a place, the atmosphere of a place. Do you feel safe and do you belong in that environment, even though you may have minimal interaction or you're just walking through? So, you know, one of the interesting things is, you know, in Frome, where we kind of did a lot of this work, it's known as a friendly town, and in fact, that has such an impact that people move there because they know it's a friendly town, and that's created a housing problem. So it's with the people we know, but it's also with the environments in which we walk. You know, a friendly workplace is very different from an aggressive, alienating workplace.
Yeah, yeah, and you can sense it right away.
Yeah.
And I guess the other reality is it's easier to do in a smaller village or rural community in the sense that, you know, you feel more geographically connected on top of everything else. But it doesn't mean that it can't be done anywhere. It's just a little bit more work in an environment where there is big geography and many people.
Well, I think that there's is it easier? I'm not even sure, you know, because so there's a couple of things to say about that. One is that that, you know, we all familiar, or many of us are familiar with the expression, it takes a village to raise a child, but actually we create a village around us all the time, because that's our social nature. The other kind of key aspect of it is around what you might call treasure maps and maps of misery. So usually when we come at things, when we're trying to get money for our work or applying for grants or whatever it is, we draw a picture of a map of misery, and you know, that's very convenient for us, because the more we can show that things are wrong, the more we can demonstrate the need for our service, and the easier it is to get money, because we can then put it right by our professional service. But there's another way of looking at what's going on, and that's about treasure maps. And treasure maps, if you like, are what you might call a combination of social capital and social infrastructure. So social capital you might define as the kind of availability of networks of relationship, and social infrastructure is becomes then the places in which those relationships happen. So that means that you can walk into any environment and go, well, where are the places that relationships happen? And then you start seeing that they happen in cafes, bars and pubs. They happen in workplaces, in schools, outside the school gates, and they happen in public spaces. They happen in sports clubs, as you've already described, in hairdressers, and then suddenly that you find that you're living in you're living in the midst of a treasure map rather than a map of misery, because you can suddenly start to identify all these places where connection and belonging happen. And so one of the advantages of a kind of a city environment is that the variety and availability of these treasures is much easier. The other side of a village environment is that people already know each other, so they don't have such greater range, but they're already kind of mixing together day to day. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts, but
yeah,
highly possible in both.
Okay, well, that's good. So we've talked about what a compassionate community is and compassionate communities. Let's just unpack a little bit about the word compassion. Like, why? I've heard you speak eloquently about this. Like, why is compassion so important, and is it hardwired in us as humans?
So that's do you want the short or the long answer?
The medium one.
Okay. So So, so first of all, let's talk about compassion, and I, you know, in a way, we identify a part of ourselves, but their emotions and, you know, our motivation and stuff doesn't fit neatly into a box where we just go and pick one out and go, oh, that's what that is. So because they come together, like all of them come together in a variety of different ways, and so you know, if you're looking at that whole way of thinking about it, then, you know, you've got compassion and you've got kindness and you've got wisdom, and then you've got emotional regulation and a whole variety of different things. Having said that, we'll talk a little bit about compassion, about what's the compassion component, what's the flavor in that soup. So the first thing is that we have to have some ability to be able to recognize, firstly, our own suffering, and then the suffering in other people. And when we see that suffering in other people or other beings, you know, like my dog is lying here very comfortable, he's not suffering much, but having awareness about when suffering is going on. And then the compassion bit is having the motivation to want to help to relieve that suffering. And then but then it's not enough just to want to help. You've actually got to get up and do something about it. So you can see it as a, you know, a transition from empathy to compassion to action, which is kind of, it becomes helpful when it's put into action, if you like. The other question you raised about, you know, is it in us naturally? And we might be tempted to think that compassion is a kind of function of religion, you know, like the great religions of the past speak about compassion. But what happens if you don't believe in any religion? Can you still have compassion? Well, clearly that's a ridiculous statement. So, but why, you know, you think, well, hang on a minute, has everyone got compassion? Well, it's a funny thing. So, I think the easiest way to understand it is to think about evolution of animals and evolution of humans. So we got up on our hind legs about 2 million years ago, and we survived, and we didn't just survive, we flourished across the whole earth in small groups of between 25 and 200 people. Now, if you're an old codger like I am, and what I learned at school was we did this through survival of the fittest. You know, like this is where the most powerful, the strongest, the most brutal beat off his rivals. It was usually a man, to be fair, and beating off the rivals, you might kill him along the way, but that doesn't really matter because you win. You know, well, our biology tells us something very different. Actually, we survived through kindness, care, compassion, looking after each other and helping each other out. And we did that because we have this ability to, the two sides of it is the ability to have love and friendships, and at the same time as to be aware of the suffering of others. And when those things come together, then that means we will naturally help each other out. And so that if you look at that, you know, with that understanding, you look at the biological pathways that suggest that we have got this kind of kind, compassionate nature, and then you see they're everywhere. It's absolutely incredible when you look for it. You see it, you know, particularly we've been able to look inside the functioning of the brain with functional MRI in the last 20 years. And we've been able to look at gene expression because of polymerase chain reaction. And we can see that these pathways, our whole system only feels like it can fully function when we have this sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging can only happen with the compassion. And that the amazing thing is, when you look for it in in the animal kingdom, you find it everywhere as well. It's incredible. And if, you know, while you're whiling away, just scrolling through the internet, have a look on YouTube on lion hugs man. If you want to know what a really good hug looks like, you'll find it there. I tell you, lions can hug properly, and much better than we do. Anyway, so but this is 600 million years of evolution, and survival of the kindest is a much better description for evolution than survival of the fittest, which is some kind of Victorian nightmare not invented by Charles Darwin, who was really interested in our social nature. And what that means is that this potential for kindness and compassion is present in every single human being. So we don't have to have this kind of special thing that we develop compassion, and it's only the compassionate people who can participate in this. No, no, no. This is part of everyday life. This happens all the time. It's when we make someone a cup of tea, or make somebody a meal, or do something kind, or smile, or say hello, or that's all a reflection of our compassionate nature. And every single human being has it, which is really handy, because if we make use of it, it benefits us and it benefits all the people around us as well.
We want to celebrate it.
Oh, absolutely. And really importantly, I think we have to talk about this story of survival of the kindest over survival of the fittest. You know, that the dominant theme of the last 400 or 500 years of Eurocentric culture has been survival of the fittest, and that causes and has caused so much harm and so much damage, and so it's really important to be saying, hang on a minute, this is some kind of weird, distorted rabbit hole that we've gone down as humanity, and we need to find our way back. Because when you start looking at, you know, the problems around the world, it's all about survival of the fittest, you know, like wars and famine and homelessness, and you find that if you have compassion, that these things dissolve and melt away, and it even spreads into political ideology. It spreads into economic systems. It spreads into our education. And the way that I've kind of summed this up is that we live in a secret in plain view, and the secret is the power of community. And when we see it, we can help this invisible magic come to life. And it comes to life everywhere. It comes to life absolutely everywhere, and it transforms everything. So it's how we are supposed to be in this world, you know. And there's, you know, amazing stuff about, if you want to live a long, healthy, happy life, it's all about relationships. And yeah, so
Well, yeah, and just build on that a bit, because I know that social connection and strong social support benefits your physical health as well.
I think that's the point. This is a biological phenomena, not a just nice thing to have. You know, what we tend to think in medicine is that we think, oh, yeah, that's the physical health of the body and all that nice relationship stuff. Well, that's, you know, that's nice, but it's not really necessary. But in fact, it turns out that's not the case at all. And if you look at the impact of good social relationships on reducing our risk of dying prematurely, good social relationships are more effective at reducing our risk of dying than giving up smoking, drinking, diet, exercise, and anything else you care to think of. Way more effective than the drug treatment of high blood pressure. So this can only be the case if it's a biological phenomenon. And what that means is that the separation between the mind and the body dissolves away in the context of community.
It's the magic pill.
It is, no question.
Okay. Okay, so I think we now have really set a firm foundation in our conversation to move on to talking about community connection and community connectors. Because obviously, like you said, compassion is action. Compassion lives in all of us. It's fundamental to community, and you know, I understand it as just one strategy to shine a light on some of these things that happen in a compassionate community. So talk a little bit more, if you don't mind, about who community connectors are and what do they do? Like, how would I recognize a community connector? Am I a community connector?
Yeah. So one aspect of this is that that community connectors already exist, and that's just like, who do you turn to when you're kind of in need of something, or somehow you need some information, or who are the natural connectors around you? So that function of community connection already happens, but if you, so this business about treasure maps, you know, if you know what's going on in your community, when you have a kind of conversation, if you know what's going on in your community, you'll naturally, if somebody comes up with a problem, you can say, look, I don't know the answer to that problem, but I know where you might be able to get some help and support with that. Well, so a way of thinking about that is, you know, this kind of relates to the treasure maps. If you have, for example, an electronic resource directory of stuff that's going on in the community, then that electronic resource on its own, you know, is like, how many billions of that stuff is already on the internet, you know, but it's about what brings it to life. Because it makes sense that if you have a way of knowing what's going on in your community, and if you have, if you like, activated citizens, then when you bring those two things together, then what that means is that if you're having a conversation in a cafe or a bar or the hairdressers or whatever it is, then, you know, the community will, people will talk about how the community can support the community, you know, about ways that people can find resources, and it's not a way of kind of fixing people, it's a way of bringing information and kindness to people. You know, just being prepared to kind of say, yeah, well, there's a place you can go where if you want help, you know, there's a place you can go to get it. Or if you want to know where the sports club is, this is where it is. Or, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. So community connectors are, if you like, activated citizens who can help the community connect to the community, and just through day-to-day conversations. And who could be a community connector? Well, the truth is absolutely anyone and everyone. You know, there can be community connectors in a workplace, in a place of worship, in a town, in a street, in a neighborhood, in a cafe, in a bar, in a hairdressers. Anyone and everyone can be a community connector.
So they're empathetic, they're approachable, they're knowledgeable, and they're out and about in the community. I've also observed that people seek out others that may have had a shared experience. You know, if
Yes.
you're, you know, dealing with something for the first time, downsizing your house and moving to a condo, going through a cancer journey, whatever. The thing people seem to want most is you know, connecting with others who have the lived experience. Not to say that they're not getting professional advice, which is also helpful and important, but very different than the kind of information and guidance they would get from somebody who's lived through some sort of life transition.
Yeah, so that's, you know, it's if you've it kind of comes back to belonging in a way. If you know that somebody understands the situation in which you're in, through having had a similar experience themselves, then it becomes, you're naturally going to connect to them. That's because you know, it's that lived experience and that's is one that you kind of recognize, and again is yet another area that we can make use of. Yet another place where we can increase connection and belonging is, you know, communities of common experience can be really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And connectors often know, you know, I haven't got any experience with that, but go and talk to my neighbor so and so because I know they've gone through that, and so they can connect people together that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit about the program for community connection that you have developed over in the UK. Through Compassionate Communities UK. So, you know, what inspired you to actually take what we're now talking about as a bit of a natural phenomena, and make a program for community connectors? And you named it TLC, Talk, Listen, and Connect, which of course is an acronym that we often have heard, you know, well, you just need a little bit of TLC. So talk about that a bit.
So one of the challenges of any kind of community-based program is that how do you reach deeply into the community? That often, you know, what you might find with a community development program is that you reach into people who are interested, but what about how do you address the issue of equity? You know, how do you make sure that you reach in a variety of different ways everywhere? Well, this is kind of based on what happened in Frome, in that we know that the community connectors, you know, that they have 20 conversations a year on how the community can affect the community, support the community. Well, we trained over 1,000 connectors in Frome. So you have 20,000 conversations in a town of 28,000 people. In terms of getting a deep dive into building these communities of support, even if it's light and informal, this is such an incredible way of doing it. So we developed this Talk, Listen, Connect program of connectors, and because, you know, the hopefully it's a snappy title that people will remember, but it's kind of simple, you know, that we listen to people and we connect with people, and the good thing about, you know, we have a little emblem of this thing, which is a kind of cup of tea which says talk, listen, connect, because so much happens over a cup of tea, where that's what you're doing is when you're having a cup of tea with someone, you talk, listen, connect, and the idea is that people can you know, spend an hour understanding about what we've been talking about in a very simple way. You know, that human beings have got this incredible potential, that social relationships are really important, that loneliness and isolation is really bad for us, and that connecting can take place everywhere. You know, this is the kind of social infrastructure is, well, any place where a connection can take place. So we've got a program where people can be trained as trainers for TLC connectors, and then you can run regular sessions, and you can where you might have 5 or 10 people who are just kind of come together and discuss, and there's a little presentation, and even there's a little 2-minute film which we'll have a look at, and so when people have been through the training, then they will automatically, without thinking, find ways of doing this in their daily life. And they like it. Like if you say to somebody, actually, we live in a kind world, that the story of human beings is growing up working together. Yeah, when you talk about that stuff, I find that people, they kind of breathe a massive sigh of relief. They kind of go, I knew it was like that. And it's really nice to hear that there's a good reason why it's like that. And so then if they, you might wear a badge, and if you walk into a cafe or a bar and there's 2 people wearing a badge that says TLC, then they might connect with each other, or so a conversation might come up, is what's that badge about? And so there's this kind of natural referral. So, I'd like to know more about that. Well, there's this training session that's going on that you can just go to, and so you gradually. So I kind of play with the figures really, and you think, well, 5%, if 20 conversations, that's over in a town of 28,000 people. So you multiply the impact of whatever, of connection and belonging by every connector that's trained by 20 times. Well, if we train 5% of the population as being TLC connectors, we'll know that it goes everywhere, like eventually they'll cover everyone. So I have this kind of vague figure in my mind, that 5%. And the other really, enormous advantage of this kind of a program is that that what connection and belonging looks like in one community is very different from what it looks like in another community. And so when you're thinking about a program of community connectors, you're really looking at this issue of equity, because you want to have connectors from across the whole of society so that everyone is represented. So you can have school connectors, you can have prison connectors, you can have LGBTQ plus connectors, you can have diverse ethnic background connectors, you can have faith community connectors. It doesn't matter. But what it means is you can pay attention to the issue of equity by making sure that the connectors are coming from, that they understand what connection and belonging is in their own community and in their own way. And so if you have connectors in that community, people will naturally connect with each other. So it's not something alien coming from the outside saying you've got to do this. It's saying, where does a connection and how does a connection and belonging happen in your community? And you can actively participate in that.
So I'm imagining in the diverse communities that you're describing, individuals learn about your program and come forward and register, or is there some sort of outreach to try and encourage and identify people that might want to come forward?
All of those things. It's not any one way, it's every way. So it's about, we tend to think, we got a program, come to the institution and you get trained in the program. But this way is no. Let's think about where the connection and belonging is happening, and we will go, the trainers will go into those environments to have the conversation in those environments. Like if you bring someone into a health center, they're already going to feel nervous and anxious because it's an unfamiliar surrounding. But if you're doing it in a pub or a cafe or a club or a community center, people are already familiar and comfortable in those environments. So it's about not just recognizing that connection and belonging happens everywhere, it's about going into those places of connection and belonging. So a park bench can be a great place to do this. A prison can be a great place to do it. You don't need to think that you have to bring people somewhere. It's about the trainers going into all of these different environments.
Okay. Julian, you have a 2-minute video on your website, and I wonder if this would be a good time to share it with our audience.
Yep, happily do that.
I don't have any volume.
Hang on, let me just stop. Do that again. Do the share again. Make sure it's sorry, that was my fault. I didn't click the button. Here we go. Good job. This is informal. Let's try that. So the other thing that we've included with Talk, Listen, Connect is that is just to do with how to support people going through grief and loss. And so 1% of the population die every year, and on average 9 people are affected by that. That means that 10% of the population die every year. And that means that 1 in 10 people you know are going through it now. And it's the responsibility of the 90% to look after the 10%, because that love and support makes an enormous difference. And so, but when you ask people about, well, how do you support people going through it? And they go, well, I don't know what to talk about. So we add in this very simple thing at the end of the Talk, Listen, Connect, is because grief and loss is so common and so prevalent all the time, just some very simple things you can do to help support people. And of course, we do grief and loss, but you can put other things on the end of the Talk, Listen, Connect training should you want. So the kind of simple rules is that actually, not to minimize or fix grief, that people don't want to be told they'll get over it or their loved one is in a better place, or, which is a kind of minimizing or fixing, but, simple things about, I'm so sorry that this happened, and I'm here for you, and what can I do to help? And there's a variety of things that you can say which support people in their grief. And for the person who's being supported, that kindness and that support is really meaningful. You know, you haven't been, oh, you should be over it by now, it's 2 years. I mean, that's just rubbish, you know, that you know, when we think about people that we've lost, people that we've known who died, their physical presence is no longer with us, but we have a different kind of relationship with them, and that's expressed as in a variety. In fact, 2/3 of the world believe that when people die, they become ancestors who help and look after us. So it's that's a you know, a sense of a different kind of relationship is established, and saying that we get over it is just rubbish. We just have a different way of kind of relating to the people that we've lost, and so there are some really simple, easy things that you can do that that help support the 10% of the population who go through grief and loss every year.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of our colleague Samira Roon's research, where she talked to bereaved people, and they said, well, you know, the professionals were helpful. The most important and best support they got were from friends and family and community, you know, throughout grief and bereavement.
This is something incredible, that this piece of research was amazing because it looked at what did people find was most helpful in moments of grief and loss, and it was family and friends that were most helpful, and the least helpful were the professional support. And what that means is that the best form of grief support is not professional, but in our communities. And it may be that some people need professional, but they still need the love and friendship of our communities as well. If that's not in place, then that's really, really tricky. So that we can think about, you know, how do we support people going through grief and loss? Well, don't have more and more counsellors, which are more and more expensive, but think about how do you bolster these community sources of grief support. And then that comes in a wide variety of different ways, you know, which might relate to grief festivals or grief literacy or grief help points or grief support groups or men's sheds or women's sheds, or, you know, because there's a huge amount of grief support which happens on an informal basis.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, just kind of looping this back to the TLC program, and the video was terrific. I noted the badge that the young woman in the coffee shop was wearing, to acknowledge or make visible, I guess, the fact that she was approachable. I noticed that the individual that came to the coffee shop and she reached out to, I would say one of the things that she did that I think is important is to be proactive and say, you look a bit down in the dumps, you know, is there anything you want to talk about? Giving them an invitation without it being pressure, but not waiting for people to ask for help. Don't you think it's hard for people to ask?
Oh, it is definitely.
Yeah.
But in a, you like, he, you know, in that example, he comes into a coffee shop on a regular basis, so they already got some light familiarity, and then it's about kind of creating that safe space where it's appropriate to ask that. But it's good to think that, you know, relationships, establishing relationships is a starting point, and then when you're, I mean, you know, I could talk about the kind of neurophysiology of all of this, but when you feel that you're in a safe space, that's where things come out. And it's how do you create those safe spaces? And then that's all to do with the body language and smiling at people and looking and familiarity and building relationship and all of that kind of stuff. So the ability to ask that question is dependent on the environment in which that happens. And so there's a very kind of active part of this is where you think about the environment and sensitivity and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So the community connectors can be in coffee shops, they could be taxi drivers, barbers or hairdressers, bartenders, anybody. So if they came and took the TLC training, describe it, just the logistics of it. How is it done? You know, how long is it? What are, you know, what's the content of the TLC training?
So in a way, if you like, this session in itself was a TLC training. It's about becoming familiar with the idea that loneliness and isolation is really bad for us, that connection and belonging is really important, that we're all natural connectors, that these connections happen everywhere all the time in different places, and that it's really helpful. And so the training is like maybe an hour going through this stuff. It's got a few slides just to try and make it easy to talk about, and we get people to do a little listening exercise, so you know, just so that you can kind of experience a bit of not interrupting but listening and all of that kind of stuff. And then we spend 20 minutes or so, you know, which is a kind of add-on on to do with grief and loss. And but you can make that add-on anything. You know, we're developing a green connector program for, you know, people who want to improve the environment, or there's all sorts of different kind of connectors that you can have, so it doesn't matter too much. But the main thing is to know that connection and belonging is really important, and that everyone has got the potential to do that.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, let's think a little bit about well, number one, you know, there may be more than 100 people listening to us today. You've suggested they may all now be community connectors. And in fact, I would guess that the fact that they had the initiative and the interest in attending our talk today already means that they, you know, have a certain openness and aptitude and want to do this kind of work. So it seems important to think about, well, how would we then, let's say as Compassionate Ottawa or anybody on the call that is representing an organization, an ethnocultural group, community center, lives in a condo, how would you begin?
So I think that you know, I'm just going to talk about how you might organize a program of training. So just on a kind of logistics level, if you think about vaguely that 5% figure, well, that, you know, that means you're going to need a lot of trainers. So each person might be able to train between 50 and 100 people a year. So if you've got you know, a town of 10,000 people, and you want to have, say, 500 of those people trained, because that's a 5% figure. If you've got 5 trainers who can run regular sessions once a month, then you'll be within a year or two, you will have reached your kind of 5%, your 5% figure. So what we do is that we say, okay, we say you have to have attended a TLC training session, and then if you want to be a trainer, we've got a train the trainer session, which says, you know, let's make sure you understand the concepts of what we're talking about. And then we do this thing where we observe the first session that the trainers run to make sure that they're just kind of on the right lines and familiar with it. So that way that you can think about how do you organize a program, and that it means that, you know, that if you're from an ethnocultural group, for example, you might want to go down the mosque and have a conversation about what this means for the mosque, and then you know, the imam might have some ideas about how people in the mosque can become TLC connectors, and maybe there's a person who, who does a training and goes, I really like that, I think I could be a trainer, and you then guide them through all of that, and then they can do the training in the mosque. And so you have this model of you democratize it going out into the community, but you, at the same time, you maintain the core essence of it.
Mm-hmm. And it seems important that there would be some ongoing connection and support for the trainers.
Yeah, so
and the connectors.
Yeah, so we do that in with Compassionate Communities UK. Is anyone who's trained can then we have a 3 or 4 times a year just a session where people can kind of dial in and talk about what they've done, but you can set up your own mechanism for people exchanging ideas and saying what worked and what didn't work. And with local groups, you can do it online, you can do it face to face, doesn't matter too much, but benefit from other people's experience. So you create your own community, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's been terrific to learn about the community connectors and the TLC program, and I think very, very inspirational for us to think about how we might move forward with the community connection program with Compassionate Ottawa and perhaps collaborate with many of the other groups. For example, I'm now working with the Ethnocultural Seniors Network of the Social Planning Council, and they, of course, I would say, I am learning, have compassionate communities within their ethnocultural groups, but at the same time remain concerned with some people who might be socially isolated, might be struggling with caregiving, grieving, serious illness. And I see this as a way of supporting their desire, to reach out and continue to support. Similarly, Compassionate Ottawa is working with faith communities. And I know there's a lot of connecting going on, and faith communities are compassionate communities, but supporting the people who are doing the work or want to do the work more would be terrific. I see opportunities for people living in places such as I do in a condo that is not what we call a NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. And this is a concept that is getting more and more attention in North America because of our aging population and of the fact that people who are aging are often sort of self-selecting to move into an apartment building or a condo or a neighborhood. And then you find yourself, although it's a mixed age environment, you find yourself with a concentration, of older people wanting to establish connections and, looking for, in a sense, that neighborly support and belonging, within that environment. And we've learned from you just how powerful and important having that will be. So I thank you very much. Do you have any? We'll turn it over to Paula, and I know there will be many questions that people in our audience will have of you, things they'll want clarification or an elaboration, but any final words before we do that?
No, well, it's so nice to have a chat with you. And I just want to, I guess, if there's one take-home message from this, it's that we are naturally kind. And that's our biology. That's our evolutionary inheritance. And the more we make use of that, the better the world is going to be. And so, get behind the program and do all this stuff, because being kind makes all the difference.
Okay, well, Julian, as always, this has been great. And I'll now turn it back to Paula, and she will be inviting questions from our audience. So thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure.
So that was, wow, that was so many things to think about, and such a, I would say, hopeful and positive way of thinking about how we can move forward and build on what we know are a lot of compassionate connections already going on in the community. I wonder, Paula, has Julian joined us?
No, Julian has not joined us just yet.
Okay. So I wonder if anybody has any questions for me as we wait for Julian. I think he was expecting to join at 11 our time, and he will be here, I think, very, very shortly.
Yeah, and if I can just say to our audience members, if you do have a question, you can leave it in the Q&A box on your screen, and we will go through them. And just while we wait, oh, and I see someone has just popped up on our screen. Julian, welcome.
I was on the other link, and
well, you
I
have
did
perfect
join.
timing.
So I made it, thankfully.
You made it just in time. Everyone just finished listening to your conversation with Mary Lou, and thank you both of you so much for having that conversation. It was really, really enriching to listen to, and we have a lot of comments in the chat box that echo that. And while we wait for some questions to come in, and again, folks can leave that in the Q&A box on their screen, I'd just like to read a couple of comments to you so that you can react to them. The first one from Anna Maria says, Ottawa has a very caring and compassionate community. We support each other in different ways and forms. However, I think the work done by caring, empathetic, loving, resilient, and compassionate members of the community is undervalued, and government at all levels are becoming more and more dependent of caring, dedicated, and committed individuals who nurture the sense of belonging, safety, and well-being.
Problem world over. I mean, you know, we've just had a so-called independent commission on palliative and end-of-life care, which when you looked at the commissioners, they all came from, you know, the vast, it's 2/3 palliative care and nobody from communities. And when you look at the report, you know, this is supposed to be the report for the way forward for palliative care, you know, to develop a strategy. I mean, it's like communities didn't exist, and people outside the people who have access to palliative care services don't exist. It's mind-blowing. But yet we all know that, you know, so 1% of the population die every year, 9 people are affected by that directly. That means 10% of the population every year have direct experience of death, dying, loss, and caregiving. And it's up to the 90% to look after that 10%. And yet that doesn't exist in the mind of legislators and palliative care services, which is why we've got public health palliative care to say, no, we're all in this together and we need to work together on it because we're all dependent on each other. And let's just not leave the majority of people out, and let's pay attention to the social and cultural context of these experiences.
So it seems to me that advocacy also becomes a role, because it's a very taken for granted resource in our community from the perspective often of policymakers and funders.
So then the next comment for you to react to, this is in reference to Julian, when you mentioned in Frome, there was a bit of a housing problem. And so this person says that emphasizes that what we do as individuals matters. What we do as individuals and the collective matters more. As a community visionary, I like the term care partners, as I think it reduces the idea that caring is one-sided. Compassion is important in all aspects of our caring.
I mean, great to hear.
Yeah.
I agree. Not much to not much to comment on. I guess the other thing is, so one of the like we tend to come at this in the context of, oh, this is about care, but it's also about love and friendship. It's also about celebration of somebody's life. It's and I run a podcast called Survival of the Kindest, and I've spoken to quite a few Indigenous people, particularly around issues around end of life, but loads of other things as well. And from an Indigenous perspective, amongst the sadness, it's healing and celebration, because somebody's becoming an ancestor. And we have to remember that 2/3 of the world believe in ancestor respect or worship, or, that when you die, you become an ancestor. So there's um, a sense of healing and celebration and gratitude and grace, which is never spoken about from the professional perspective. And so when we use the word care, I think the care encompasses all of these kind of um, other things, which are so much more than somebody being in need of care, if you see what I mean. This is a community event, where there are definitely, attention definitely needs to be paid to help and support in a variety of ways, but it's also celebration, it's also appreciation, and it's also a time of coming together, which is enhances community.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, and I really agree with everything you're saying. But one of the things that distinguishes relationships within a compassionate community between members of a compassionate community and a professional relationship is the mutuality. I mean, Julian, you and I are in a compassionate community. We share a relationship, it's ongoing. We do things for each other, and that becomes the normalized culture, the normalized values of how we work together. And it makes, we commented in the conversation about how difficult it is for people to ask for help sometimes. But when we have a long-standing embedded practice of helping each other, and it becomes that normalized part of the way we work together, that's quite a different thing, quite a different feeling.
Totally agree with that.
Right, so then we do have some questions here. If we jump into the first one, which is a bit of a very logistic focus question, Julian, is the TLC training available to people that are outside of the UK?
So we run a regular session each month on Compassionate Communities UK, which is an online training, and anyone can join. We have a little badge, a big badge that you get at the end, which costs a fiver, and that's at £5. I don't know what that is in Canadian dollars, but and we run it. We vary the time, so sometimes it's in the morning UK, sometimes in the afternoon, so that people can from around the world can join in if they feel like it. So yes is the answer, and you'll find all the details on our website.
Great. And just to add for our audience members, you will receive a link to that website in the material that you'll be sent after this webinar. And then one question was, how do you handle confidentiality when community members are speaking with connectors?
So I think the key bit of this is that what we're producing, what we're talking about is an activated citizen, a kind of enhanced friendship. So like they're normal conversations that we have all the time, and it's not we're not it's not a fixing, it's not a counseling service, it's not volunteering. This is part of normal life, and in a way that's the beauty of it, because somebody is trained as they have this training on being an activated citizen, and they just go and do it in the way, whatever way is right for them. So it's not about confidentiality, it's about being a good person. So, you know, and you would maintain your integrity if you're having a conversation with somebody like you would with anyone else. You know, it's not you're just being a kind person, you know, that's all.
And the relationship would, of course, as you explained, be based on familiarity, trust, and respect for that individual's privacy. I mean, and we all know that privacy as a practice, what we consider to be private does vary from situation to situation and from culture to culture. So the point that you're making is that the commonality between the connector and the person whom they're connecting would allow them to have that shared understanding.
Then the next question, they comment that there has been, of course, the message that we are naturally kind throughout the discussion today. And they note that in our modern world, it seems as if there is more space between people and there's less kindness seemingly afloat. And they wonder, you know, how do you sort of navigate that when you're in a larger community, or of course you mentioned smaller community pockets that it can be started in, but they were just wondering how to tackle sort of this way that communities have become more distant in the grand scheme.
So I think that's one of the major lessons from Froome is about how, you know, you can ask the question about how do you engage everyone in this? And it means that this needs to be visible and felt everywhere. So if you go to a bar or a restaurant or a cafe or the library or the doctor's surgery, or it doesn't matter where, if you come across a police community support officer, a taxi driver, you know, if this is why I said at the end there is this central message around survival of the kindest. It doesn't come from somebody from the outside telling us what to do. It comes from the inside of each and every one of us. And when you walk into an environment where you have a warm sense of connection, that's so different from walking into a hostile environment. If you go into a bar and nobody looks up, or they look up in an aggressive way, and you know it's got a cold atmosphere, that's so different from when you walk into a bar and somebody looks up and they got a TLC badge on and they smile at you and you feel warm welcome. And then there's somebody over at the table who's also got a TLC badge, and what could be a hostile environment becomes transformed. And that's really about, I think, how you make places friendly and how you start to overcome what I see as that humanity has kind of gone down a rabbit hole over the last 400 years, and we need to kind of find our way back to understand our goodness and what it is to live in community.
All right, well, those are all of the questions that we have at the moment. So I would like to thank you both once again and invite Monica Patton back on the screen to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. And thank you so much, Mary Lou and Julian. What a very rich conversation. I have pages and pages of notes. I'm very excited about what I have heard and read about this initiative before the call this morning. So I'm all for it. And I hope that we all, wherever we are, practice even more kindness than we already are committed to. Thank you both so very, very much, Julian, for fitting us into what has been a very hectic day for you, I know. And Mary Lou, as usual, you have really added so much value to what we have been talking about this morning. And it's great to have two old friends, Mary Lou and Julian, in conversation with each other, and that your friendship, your kindness to each other, your connection to each other has come across in this conversation and is an example for all of us. So thank you so much. Thank you for all of you for joining us. And as Paula has said, we will be putting this conversation on our YouTube channel. But before that, she'll be sending out some information and some background material, I believe. And let me just tell you that we'll be starting up conversations with leaders again in September. The plan at the moment is that we will have a conversation with some buddies, probably more than one person, who are living compassion on the streets of Ottawa as frontline workers. And I know that that will be a way to build on what we've talked about today and on the work that is going on in this community and perhaps in other communities as well. So look for news about that event. It will be sometime in the second half of September. Again, thank you for being with us. Let me invite you, if you care to make a donation to Compassionate Ottawa. You are able to do that on our website. We have some very generous funders, and we're very grateful to our funders, and they include generous donors, and we invite you to become a generous donor as well. That's how we can have Julian and Mary Lou and others like them talk with you and talk with each other. So thank you so much for being with us. Look for the message from Paula, and Paula, as usual, thank you for helping make this a wonderful morning. Goodbye for now.